Okay, good morning. My name is Christian Philipson and I wrote my bachelor thesis about Colombian teacher roles and epistemic violence. So today I'm a bit nervous to speak, first because I'm speaking in English and my second language is actually Spanish, and second because I speak about epistemic violence, which is not that easy to talk about. So first I will present my structure. This presentation consists on the purpose of presentation. Second, I will talk about the identification of epistemic violence in Colombia. And third, I will talk about the forms of undoing epistemic violence in Colombia. So let's go through the purpose. Well, let's tell you, my purpose begins by my experience I made during my one-year stay in the Javeriana, the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Colombia de Bogotá. And well, I had the possibility to study Latin American philosophy and also Latin American educational theories. So I had this one seminar from Rafael Reyes Galindo, a really good teacher, and so there we spoke a lot about Latin American education, about Paulo Freire and critical theory, Foucault, and so I got known the work of the GHPP, Grupo de la Historia de la Práctica Pedagógica, and that will be also the main reference of today, the Grupo. It's an investigation group who started like in the 70s to theorize and historize pedagogy in Colombia. And when I got known this works, I was asking myself, why don't they exist in Europe or in Germany? Why don't we speak about like alternative forms of education or critical, like critics from the global south? So, you know, my whole BA studies, we didn't speak at all about alternative theories and global perspectives on education. And actually, that's also then my purpose why I'm here. My purpose is to talk, of this talk is to mediate. And it's not only a mediation between languages, it's moreover a mediation like a transcultural and philosophical mediation, in the sense of Baba maybe. It is therefore to reflect teacher roles also in Europe, and it's a recontextualization of a local phenomenon. So I want to put it in another frame of thinking, and that is why I also use the term of epistemic violence. Yeah. So I hope that at the end we can make a short reflection about European pedagogical culture by seeing the external and internal attributed teacher roles in Colombia. Okay, so then we come to epistemic violence exemplified by external attributed teacher roles. So I would start to identify epistemic violence in the pedagogical context of Colombia, and therefore first I want to cite Foucault, who in a dialogue with Deleuze says, I'm starting to cite, and when the prisoners began to speak, they possessed an individual theory of prisons, the penal system, and justice. So from this side, we will assume that there is a kind of own epistemic value of being prisoner who enables him to theorize the world by himself. Let's broaden this to just say in the so-called praxis, we find an own epistemic value, okay? And yeah, in connection to that, I will now cite a historiator of Colombia, Oscar Saldarriaga Vélez, who historized Colombian teacher roles in the 20th century. And like, this is actually not a cite from him, it's more like a supposition through this supposition he historizes the Colombian educational history. And so the site is, we will be what our teachers are. And so he goes through his text through Colombian history and looks like what were the different connotations of this general assumption we normally make. And I think this assumption is very clear. we see here a strong society forming connotation. So if our teachers, for example, are subordinated, our society somehow will be affected by this, no? And exactly, so that is also like the beginning of analyzation of the actual situation of teachers in Colombia, because let's say we see here that if we look through the work of the Grupo de la Historia de la Práctica Pedagógica, we can identify the main problem for educational workers was their subaltern status. They didn't have rights to neither to co-decide in education politics, neither really recognition of their intellectual status. Therefore, I will go on to explain this a bit further with this term of Zuluaga, which is the atomization of pedagogy. So what she means with this term is actually a phenomenon she has observed in Colombia, and it is that pedagogy, in an ideal sense or in a positive connotation, was actually replaced or reduced by educational science. The pedagogy was atomized, like they took different parts and tools of it and mixed it in educational science. And so actually, yeah, what was happening then was we saw like psychological, administrative and sociological tools which were put on pedagogy for like effectualizing them or making it more effective. But actually the real sense of pedagogy was lost then. That's what's the main sense of this term, the atomization of pedagogy. She also talks later on about alienation of pedagogy, like that pedagogy in Colombia has become alienated. And therefore, so we see, and there's an external attribution to the teacher roles. So that means what does theory and state think about what are our teachers? Who do they have to be? And the external attribution was since then like executor of theory, data collecting assistant, and instructor. And there we see the strong psychological and sociological note that it is somehow a person who has no right to really decide what, how, and when he teaches the thing. That it's actually a person which is not assumed like a real and intellectual. Moreover, it's assumed this person is assumed as a executor of theory. And so he depends on it. We can also see similar argumentations, or also like the historical backgrounds. We can see it in Saldarriaga Vélez, who has like analyzed the Colombian educational history since the 20th century in El Oficio de Maestro. And there we can also see, for example, that there was a strong abuse of rationalism for an elitist and ecclesial society. So that's also interesting, because we see here like a kind of the use of European theories for establishing an unautonomous society. Okay, animations do not work. Oh. Sorry. Why can't I go back? Well, okay. So with this term epistemic violence, we go on now. We want to know what is epistemic violence, and with this term, I took the term from the publication of Brunner. Epistemische Gewalt is called her publication, and she means therefore epistemic violence is not external or aligned to the academic real. It is rooted in knowledge itself, in its genesis, formation, organization, and effectiveness. So what she does in her book is to unify us a lot of concepts. She comes from like the conflict and peace studies, and also has sociological and political science perspective on it. And so she unifies different concepts, so as for example Butler's normative violence, Bourdieu's structural violence, and then she takes the whole decolonial, post-colonial perspective from Spivak, Santos, Quijano, etc., and she unifies it to like a strong definition, which enables us to identify epistemic violence on different layers. And I want to exemplify this on Colombian teachers. So what we have then, we have first a micro layer. With the micro layer, Brunner, she refers to coloniality of being, and that is violence directed to the teacher's body. In our case, it's the teacher's body. It could be also a woman's body, for example, or whatever, and WAMP. Okay, so it's meant with that epistemics has effect on the body of individuals, and it can be violent. Yeah. To exemplify this more concrete, the teachers, like first we can see teachers were pursued and threatened subjects in Colombian history. Second, but also, and that's really important, teachers' bodies and minds, they are caught in a certain situation caused by this external attribution, and it is like the force to work in a system without being able to change it. And also the force, and that's the third point, the force to produce a violent and subordinated Colombian society through this role which is attributed to them, without being able to change it. So that would be some aspects on the micro layer, for example. Then later on we see the meso layer, and that's described as coloniality of knowledge. And here's referred moreover to theory, production, and knowledge organization in society. So here is meant epistemics also have effect on society. And that can also produce a violent society, for example, or violence in society. And that's also what we've seen before in the analysis of the Grupo de la Historia, that like if we have, for example, a epistemical situation in Colombia which oppresses own theory production, then somehow this is also oppressing an autonomous society. Also, I found in Salariaga's work that he criticizes, for example, in Colombia, the true pedagogical offers and their relation to a capitalization, which could be seen as relation to the meso layer, reproduction and organization of knowledge through a capitalist system, which in large range produces inequality and injustice in the society of Colombia. Okay, so let's go on then. The macro layer, that's called coloniality of power, and with this is meant a global system of asymmetrical resource distribution. So what is meant here, like that's the assumption at all. It's according to Quijano, this concept of coloniality of power, and it is assumed from decolonial perspectives, which refer that to a dynamic, global dynamic, which parts the world in winners and losers, we could say, or moreover, like privileged one and unprivileged ones. And this separation goes through the interlaced categories sexism and racism, which were brought by coloniality, or by colonialism, let's say. So Brunner here refers to three elements of this global system, and she says that's first capitalism as an universalized exploitation system. Second, the state as an universalized form of public authority, and third, the Eurocentrism as dominant form of rationality and knowledge production. And we can strongly see this if we have a look on Aguilar and Rosero and others who have published also a work about the pedagogical movement. We will talk later on. They also say that Colombian educational politics was since then influenced by really strong influence by International Monetary Fund, Colombian and the International Bank, for example. Like, actually it was international financial organizations, global financial organizations, which were managing educational politics in Colombia. Okay, so that means that Colombian society was thought and treated through a thought which was thinking them as workers, but not necessarily as thinkers. Okay, and another point in this recontextualization is then this makes visible an important view. Epistemic work is not detached from capitalism. Actually, it's vice versa. The problem of epistemic violence is the capitalist influence on theory production. So, for some, or to say it more polemically, for some people it's just a neutral thought of Kant, for example. But for others it means a elimination of thought replaced by Kant. Okay, I will now go on. We saw now the comparison of epistemic violence and the situation of teachers in Colombia. We pass now to the second point of my presentation. That's the forms of resistance we can see in the Movimiento Pedagógico de Colombia. It was a kind of social movement which was founded in the early 70s as a loose attempt of educational workers to improve their working loan conditions, to improve their subaltern status, and therefore to be recognized in a co-decisional right of educational politics. So here I have another site from Saldarriaga, and it's telling, he describes this movement as a movement of not only union demands, but more importantly epistemological demands. That is, the autonomy of their knowledge from those intellectuals of the education science who have usurped their word before and now. Okay. Yeah. So for understanding better what it is, what this movement was, it was like a loose attempt from educational workers. They came together protesting and building different forms of collectivization for bettering the educational situation in Colombia. And Contreras and Murcia, they have described these emerging roles through a process of collectivization. Okay, and so what they describe is Colombian teachers, they felt ashamed, and that's meant in a twofold sense. So what we have here is a feeling of shame, first about the status of their work as executors, but second also as a shame about the situation they are co-producing with their work, because they recognize their social constructive character of their work. So I think that's really important, and maybe a few of you have wondered about the image. I think that's really interesting here to say that it is normally traditionally we think teachers as the shaming ones and not the ashamed ones. Normally we tend to say, like Pink Floyd also said, "Hey teacher, leave them kids alone." That's why I put this image here. So secondly, we have teachers who began to speak, and therefore there's meant with that that's also in a twofold sense. And first, they really spoke, like orally. They created oral spaces to interchange and exchange about their actual situation. But in a second sense, they created documents. They created spaces like scientific spaces of theorization of their work. So they wrote magazines. They published scientific works. Then third, we have the diverse and solidary. They were diverse and solidary because it was a loose attempt. It was not a homogeneous coming together of just one syndicalist party or something. It was a loose attempt of different and yeah, so they were concluding in the aim they had, but they were not, they were differing in identities and backgrounds. And last, they exemplified alternative forms of existence. So that therefore is mean like during the Colombian conflict, we have to put us in the place of Colombian history, like since the 50s actually, Colombian conflict is going on. And teachers, according to Murcia and Contreras, were exemplifying an alternative form of existence, which means they were showing a pacific and democratic form of living, while they were living in a society which was really violent and ideologized. That is what brings then Contreras and Murcia to describe teachers as intellectuals of culture and activists of life. So that means teachers were democratically fighting for their intellectual and cultural constructing status, which can also be interpreted as fight for an autonomous Colombian society at all. And so I come back to the side of Foucault, and I think we can adapt it now and say, and when the teachers began to speak, they possess an individual theory of school, culture, and knowledge. Okay, now I will come to the last part of the presentation, and that is the emergence, that is now the forms of undoing we can identify with Brunner. What I want to tell here, Brunner had thought not only about epistemic violence and how to identify it, moreover she thinks about the concept of undoing epistemic violence, which means a certain forms of practice which has to be necessarily collective and which are helping to reduce or at least resist epistemic violence. And that's, for example, first the search for utopias. And we could see this in the posture of the teachers in Colombia, because they were standing for a better Colombia and fighting for a democratic and better functioning and self-thinking society, actually. Yeah. So the creation of new concepts, that was exemplified by the terms we already had, and there is a lot more, like atomization of pedagogy, alienation of pedagogy, or also activists of life, for example. The recurse to other forms of knowledge. So that we can exemplify by a teacher solidarity theory we have seen in the GHPP, for example, was one of a lot more groups which were teachers solidary, which were not like opposing to them and telling them what they have to do. They were listening to them, actually. And yeah, then the questioning and changing of violence embedded in the body, that we can see like also in teachers as ashamed subjects, as threatened subjects, and also in the forms of collectivization when they went to the street and actually like transforming the violence they have lived into power in the street and empowerment. The questioning of one's own premises and privilege and morality. So that is also related to the theory, to the posture of the theories we have seen in the GHPP. They were teacher solidary. Then there's the entanglement and collaboration of theory and practice with regard to social movements and political struggles. Well, I have to repeat it. Like theory and praxis were working together. Actually, I have to just one point more here. We could see then in Colombia in these times that theory was separating. There was a teacher solidary theory and there was a European solidary theory. You know, like individual scientists who were repeating, I don't know, some things about European educational science. I mean, I don't think they were really solidary with the teachers' movement, because maybe it was actually also threatening their existence. I don't know. Okay. So 7, creating and sustaining resistance through social, political, and scientific practice. And that's also exemplified by resisting social movement and this resisting theory. The GHPP publishes until now. I mean, the movement, I don't know actually if they're active, but there is a certain form of collectivization of teachers. I'm almost sure. And Yeah, and anyways, in these times, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they showed a really strong form of resistance through different dynamics of power and violence. And the last point, naming epistemic violence and its scientific analysis. And well, we can say actually this term was not invented then, and also I don't know if the GHPP or Zuluaga, for example, as their founder, would use this term, but we have seen a similar concept in the atomized pedagogy or the alienated pedagogy. So they are actively thinking about the relation between epistemics and power, the relation between what do theorists have to do and how do they like really contribute to a positive and self-thinking society and not producing a subordinated one. Yeah. So that's all I have to say for now, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thanks for your attention. And yeah, here's the bibliography. Bye bye.